And I'm going to do a mid-all. So
Great.
See you on the other side.
Yeah. Fun. Hey, Judy. Raven, hi. The Isaacmans are here. Andrea, oh, this is so great. Do you hear the song, Andrea? For all of you on Facebook, we're getting ready to start our town hall here in about a minute. Wow. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. This is so great. Clearly an issue that's very important to so many people. Really touching to see you all here tonight.
And Rep Reynolds, should we get our little staff portion at the beginning?
Yeah.
Yes, let me cue down this music. Yeah, I will begin my little piece right now. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe. I'm a staff for Representative Reynolds. And before we get to the main presentation tonight and the question and asking portion of the evening, I just wanted to do a few quick things. I just wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. Right now, especially in House District 36, which is Rep Reynolds' district, is seated on the traditional land of the Yali Tualatin, the Wasco Cowlitz, and the Clackamas and Kalapuya. Indigenous people have played a significant role in shaping the world we live in today. So we wanted to acknowledge them before we get started. And one quick note about the format of this evening, we will begin with a little bit of presentations from each of the speakers. But when it comes to the Q&A section, we will be asking people to put their questions in the chat that me and other staff will be reviewing. And when it comes to that portion, we will then ask the speakers to speak on those questions. But if the chat were to get a little bit too distracting, then we will just close it down for a little bit, and you can send those questions directly to me and they will get across to the speakers. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Representative Reynolds.
Wow, good evening, everyone. I'm seeing that we have close to almost 200 people here, and it's really a testament to how important this issue is to so many of us. My name is Lisa Reynolds. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a pediatrician, and I'm the state representative for much of Portland's West Side, which includes downtown and Old Town. And I'm a member of the state legislature, which means I work down in Salem, and what we do down there is we craft the state's budget, we pass laws, and then we follow up and make sure that the money and the programs are doing what we intended them to do. And I love Portland. I've lived here for almost 30 years. My sons went to Lincoln High School. I have a really rewarding career as a pediatrician and now as the state legislature. And this is home. But Portland is struggling to take care of its own. Rising rents and a lack of affordable housing have led to too many of our neighbors living outdoors. The latest estimate is about 2,000 people are living outdoors. And we know that people from our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are disproportionately affected. And both are true, right? We feel deep empathy for the conditions in which our houseless neighbors are living. And we feel a fear and a concern about the tent villages on our sidewalks. Current conditions for those living outdoors are unacceptable, and it's uncomfortable for those of us standing watch. And remember, though we know that some of our unhoused neighbors suffer from mental illness and addiction and domestic violence, it's the living on the streets that exacerbates, if not actually causes, these afflictions And we must provide safe, warm places for people to live as the first step in healing. And it's why I repeat the mantra of Central City Concern: housing is healthcare. We can and we must do better. And that is why I've convened tonight's conversation. We will hear from people with lived experiences and people doing the work. And now I'd like to have my co-hosts briefly introduce themselves. We'll start with Commissioner Meieran. Commissioner Sharon Meieran.
Let me get her as a co-host. Okay, Commissioner Meieran, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Like I can't unmute. The usual issues. Hi.
And Sharon, to be clear, this is just your brief introduction.
Yep.
Then we're gonna, yeah, sorry.
Yes, my brief introduction. Okay. I am Sharon Meieran. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Multnomah County Commissioner representing District 1, and that is all of Multnomah County west of the Willamette River, as well as the inner east side south of I-84 and out to Cesar Chavez. I am also an emergency room doctor in sort of my parallel life. It's wonderful to be here tonight.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Representative Reynolds. Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Ryan. I'm a Portland City Commissioner. You can call me he, him, they, and I represent the entire city of Portland. And I'm thrilled to be here with all of you tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Kaia Sand, can you introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kaia Sand, and she, her pronouns, and I direct Street Roots. We've been around 22 years. We are a weekly newspaper sold by people experiencing homelessness and poverty. We are also more than that. So I'm going to turn it to Gary and Raven, who are with me as they run the ambassador program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Raven, sorry, Gary, I don't mean to interrupt you. I was going to have Raven introduce yourself quickly, and then Gary's going to tell his story. And I didn't mean to say quickly. You know what I mean.
Oh, I know. I'm Raven Drake. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Ambassador Program Manager at Street Roots, and happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And now we will be turning the virtual floor over to Gary Barker to tell his story.
Okay, thank you. I'm also at Street Roots as the lead ambassador. And what the ambassador program is designed for is that when the ambassadors find a project, they are assigned to it and they bring it forth. So me being the first one to do this, I have the glorious position of running the Mojo program, which is mobile journalism. And I got a little bit of story to say where I came from so you can understand what I've been through and I'm still going through. I was in the street for about 2 years, and about the second year, or about 6 months, I started for 6 months. I worked a year out there selling papers in the street. It was a slow start, but it was a good start because it gave me a purpose when I didn't have a purpose. I was hanging out on the streets doing the norm that most homeless people do, drink, and party, and thinking we being ratted on, or ratted on. I didn't have any motivation. I didn't want to do anything, but the paper started making me feel like I was doing something proper because I got to meet people, my clientele, and we had stories and we shared those stories, and it made me feel better that people cared. It allowed me to know that people really do care about people. And I have a philosophy about me is people helping people. And I believe that's the only way that we're going to be able to save this world if we do it collectively, because everybody has a vital part to do. Everybody's part's a little different, and it's still the same size. No matter how big the part might be, I'm still the same as anybody else. So I struggled through my homelessness. I got in trouble in May. I had mental issues. I still have mental issues, and I kind of snapped. I reached that breaking point, and I harmed someone, and I ended up in the mental health court rather than doing 10 years. I'm lucky. I was blessed with that. So it created a barrier. going into my first housing situation started at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was working at Street Roots. I could not find a place, and the Public Defender's Office of Portland, Metropolitan Defender's Office, the lawyer there that works for veterans, called them up. And the next thing I know, I had my first apartment. But I knew it was going to be a long haul, and it was, because they were doing every little spiteful thing they could to get rid of me. But I made it through the year, I guess only because the sprinkler head broke in the apartment, because we were supposed to be out of the apartment on the 31st, and on the 30th of April, it broke, and I had nowhere to go. So I was sleeping in my car with me and my ex-wife. It's pretty rough. And through the grace of God and a lot of hard work from the associations of the agencies that I was working with, I ended up in an apartment, and it's a better apartment than what I had. It was just great. That's where I come from. And it was a hard road because I've been through the sweeps, and the sweeps are starting again, and it bothers me. So I started working on the Mojo program. And it's kind of like they just tossed it in my lap. Here, work this. I said, what is this? It's a Mojo. What's Mojo mean? Whatever you want it to mean, but it's a program we want to create. So I said Mojo, and I made it very simple: capital MO, capital JO, and abbreviate those abbreviations for mobile journalism. So people would start getting used to seeing that. And we took participants that are unhoused that were interested in writing or telling stories, basically. And we partnered up with Vanport Musée, and we're partnering with them in this program. So the work that these three participants have done will be out during the festival around the 10th or the 14th, maybe sooner, maybe later. But the public will have access to see what these three participants accomplished. And it gave them self-esteem. It was amazing to watch these people work. They were unhoused, so it means they're sleeping outdoors, and they still will come in clean and enthusiastic. Because somebody gave them a chance. Somebody reached out and said, hey, come on. And we paid them a stipend too. They didn't even know they were going to get the stipend. I just kind of sprung it out on them at the last minute. And they made it through. I haven't lost one of them. So I'm proud of that. And it was hard work. And we had PCC professor working as a teacher. She was a teacher, teaching them editing, writing, interviewing skills. So the projects are going to be completed around the 10th. And I'm doing a special project too, where I'm going to edit and have a presentation piece about the program, because it shows all the hard work, all the energy that these three participants put in. I just wanted to work with three people to see if it would work. And now we know what we need to do. So now we're going to unroll and unravel the full program, which will run a year. So it's been a long road, a hard road, but I'm grateful for the help of Street Roots, because Street Roots is designed to reach out and help those unhoused and poverty-stricken people that want to do something. They give you the opportunity to increase your income. If you have no income, that's an increase. But you have to have the initiative and the willpower to understand the process. You work for yourself, so you have to motivate yourself. And I think it's a great concept. And I'm glad Street Roots has been around 20 years. And the way we doing things with our new invented ideas, we'll be around another 20 years. So thank y'all for letting me share. I think I shared enough about who I am and where I came from. I came from Wichita, Kansas. I do have college, and then I did work in the aerospace industry for 25 years. But I got hit in the head in 97 that caused me to literally lose everything. And it's been a long road trying to get back into the workforce. I didn't work until I ran into Street Roots. So I'm grateful, and haven't used this brain of mine an awful long time. So it's still a little rusty, but I think I'm doing a fantastic job. I hope you enjoy the festival, and I hope you enjoy this townhouse meeting. And if you have any questions that you might want to ask me, I'll be free to open and answer them to the best of my ability. I'm just like you. I'm still there, but I'm just giving back what was given to me freely.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gary, for sharing your story. And I'll make sure you get a copy of the chat. A lot of people are writing words of thank you for your story. Thanks for being open. Thanks for being available. Thanks for being here. And really, really grateful. And we probably will call on you a little later in this evening. And hey, this is going to be the first of several events where we come together. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. I do want to, we're gonna shift into kind of the policy part of today's event. We're gonna be talking a little bit of policy and solutions, and then we'll be going back to Street Roots. I did want to share a Street Roots story though, which is that people have heard me tell this story before, which is I was at a suicide prevention walk, and the parents of a young man who had died by suicide they spoke at that event, and they said when their son was involved with Street Roots, they knew that he was in a good place, and that at that point they were raising money for Street Roots. So that really has struck home with me. And people also know I have a mentally ill brother who has mostly been housed, but he has had periods of time when he's been unhoused. So this has a personal touch for me too, but thank you all for being here. I want to share a little bit as we talk about policy, a few of the things that happen at the state legislature level. And just very briefly, one is that when the economic fallout of the COVID pandemic, was becoming quite clear, the state put a moratorium on evictions and has funneled hundreds of millions of dollars, both in rent support for tenants and in rent reimbursements for landlords. The state also started a $65 million program so that different organizations could purchase hotels to serve as, I think, kind of medium-term shelter, which was especially important in COVID when we needed space between people. The state is opening up navigation centers, which are shelters where we help connect families with healthcare services and permanent housing. And we're expanding a little bit, I'll be honest, funding for mobile crisis units so that when we call 911 when someone is having a mental health issue, or we call 911 because we're concerned about the safety of a homeless person, houseless person, we'll be sending out a medic and a social worker instead of law enforcement. But the real work, let's be honest, the real work is being done by local governments, by the county and the city of Portland, as well as a lot of amazing community-based organizations, advocacy groups, and other nonprofits. And so I'm going to turn this over to the other two policy people in the room, Commissioner Sharon Meieran and Commissioner Dan Ryan. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reynolds. And Joe, I don't know if the slides are able to be queued up. This is promising. Wow. I can never do, wow. So it's really like magic. Thank you. And there's been a little bit of a change, but I think they'll give a good framework to go through some of this stuff. So I guess it in some ways goes without saying, but I think we do need to say it, that we right now are facing a public health, public safety, and humanitarian crisis with regard to people living unsheltered on our streets and in other spaces outside. Things were pretty bad before COVID. I mean, you might even remember that time when when this was an issue that we were trying to address and deal with. But with COVID, things have just exploded and gotten so much worse. And we absolutely need to be doing something. I'm going to just give a little tiny bit of information here, but in terms of how we address homelessness overall, we kind of have three basic buckets we're working from. So we talk about prevention, which is really the best approach. If we could prevent someone from becoming houseless or homeless, then we avert so much trauma and suffering. It's cheaper, it is just better all around. So that's one approach that we take. If people do lose their housing, then we need to provide shelter, some sort of a safe place for them to be, with the goal of getting them back into permanent housing as soon as possible. And traditionally, the idea has been to have this be brief, have it be transitional, provide service connections, and boom, move through the system. And we all know it is not really working like that these days. But our third bucket is permanent housing. And so for a certain population of people who are, I'm going to call chronically homeless, who have severe underlying disabilities, could be mental health issues, physical health issues, and do not make any income or make a very low income. What we know works as a permanent solution ultimately is to get people into supportive housing. And that is housing that's deeply affordable and has intensive wraparound services that let people sort of thrive and sustain in the housing. So we need that combination. And this is who I think we're talking about. There's so much else that is out there in terms of homelessness and a lot of the work being done. But today, what I'm focusing on is that population of individuals who are living outside, unsheltered, with some disabling conditions and with a lot of challenges to be housed. I think that Representative Reynolds had alluded to some of the numbers. The last time we counted, and even then our counts were not very accurate, was 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, when there were 2,000 unsheltered people, another similar amount of people living in shelters, but for months and months and months, not the brief transitions it's supposed to be. And we only know things have gotten significantly worse since 2019. Next slide, please. So recognizing this huge need and not having the resources to provide the services to wrap around people and keep them in housing, along with the rent assistance they might need, our metro region passed a supportive housing services measure. And we have a local implementation plan, and thank you to everyone who's on here. Thank you to the region for passing that. Desperately needed resources. Through work of a coordinating board of our local sort of Home for Everyone coalition, we developed what's called a local implementation plan, or LIP, that set out the priorities to guide us in allocating the money that would be coming in from this measure, which is a tax measure on so-called higher income earners. In this LIP, there were a few significant priorities set out. It's a 40-page document, or 30-something pages. It's pretty long with hundreds of pages of addendums, but the main priorities are equity, acknowledging the fact that there is a disproportionate impact of houselessness just across the spectrum on people who are Black, Indigenous, other people of color in our system, and we need to be addressing that head on. The need for supportive housing services, the profound need for behavioral health services, and a profound need for alternative shelter, which was described as one of the most pressing needs as identified through data and by stakeholders. Next slide. And so, speaking now a little divergent of how our budgets and how our processes impact this, how we really actually get the funds out there to be used. In the county, our proposed budget begins our process of board deliberation. The chair, Deborah Kafori, puts out a proposed budget that is very, takes a lot of work, a lot of input, but the rest of the board doesn't come into it until the end of April. And then we see her budget, and then we talk about what we want to see in terms of our final budget. This budget includes an allocation of the $52 million of supportive housing services measure funds, also almost $79 million of American Rescue Plan funds from the federal government, and it supports a number of excellent short and long-term strategies to end homelessness. So it invests in supportive housing for 800 people who are potentially chronically homeless. And it invests in up to 400 new shelter beds, including through proposals that we've solicited from community members through the Joint Office of Homeless Services with our partners at the city. The thing is, despite unprecedented investments to expand housing access, our region is going to have unmet housing needs. Next. And so what do we do in the now? While people are living outside, and we've all seen it, many on this that might be on this call have experienced it. Those on this panel, Gary and Raven, have experienced it. And what do we do for those folks experiencing significant health issues, safety issues? People are dying, increasing numbers on the street. What do we do about that? And the impact this has on our community as a whole. So I think about it as I am a doctor, and I think about this in terms of the public health concept of harm reduction. And that's an approach where we use to lessen the negative impacts of an underlying healthy set of circumstances or a condition. So this isn't about right now long-term housing. This is about how do we reduce the trauma and harm being experienced by people right now living outside and impacting our community? And how can we promote that safety, security, and stability that gets them on a better path to get them services and make that bridge to access housing? Next slide, please. And so what I have proposed in order to attain this is sort of a two-pronged approach. It would involve a coordinated network of outdoor shelter sites to provide safety, community, and basic hygiene services to people currently experiencing unsheltered houselessness. And ideally, there would be a range of sizes of sites where people could sleep safely, from small ones, 8 to 10 folks, to safe parking sites, to larger, more structured village type models. But all would meet basic requirements: toilets and hygiene services, safe heating, garbage and recycling and sharps collection, safe, dry, insulated sleep structures, and access to appropriate services, including things like Portland street medicine, behavioral health services, and transitions to housing. Next. So I have some proposals. I had some proposals. We need to start with a real number of these things to actually make an impact. We need to identify where it's going to happen. The city and county need to be working together on this. And what's beautiful is that we are. And this work, what's happening right now, and I think you'll hear from my my friend and Commissioner Ryan with the city, is that our visions are actually aligning. We need to do this urgently. This is not something that can wait because people are suffering. But we need this joint approach to problem solving. We're in it together as a community, as local government, as everyone here today. And we need to do it in a coordinated way and be flexible. So with that, I will turn over to Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you. We're going to have to share all these chats for later. A lot of people were cheering you on.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Meieran. And I want to start off by also, there's Gary. I always think that you can see me looking at you when I'm staring at the screen. Thank you, Gary, for sharing your story. It's just always so important to remember when you're working on policy, when you're looking at data, there are people behind the data, behind the policies. And so thank you, Representative Reynolds, for knowing how important it was to have lived experience voice in this forum tonight. Commissioner Meieran, you've just been the most incredible partner since I first got on into this gig. And speaking of great partners, Executive Director Kaia Sand has been the same. We have some really deep conversations that allow me to stretch my thinking And I'd like to think, like all good dialogue on something so complex, maybe I stretch hers a bit too. So this is what it's like to be doing this work. So I'd like to take this opportunity to really just introduce myself. I'm the Portland City Commissioner, and I took office in September. It was that week when we were all holed up because of the fires. And I oversee the Housing Bureau, the Bureau of Development Services, the Children's Levy, and the Joint Office for Homeless Services. And that's where I coordinate with the county to approach how we are going to look at this houseless crisis together. And I do mean together. The more we're aligned, the more our arrows are aligned, the deeper impact we're going to have. We all want safe, stable housing for all Portlanders. And that's a deeply personal issue for me. It was 8 years ago that my brother died on the Portland streets. Tim was chronically houseless. He was duly diagnosed with mental health and addiction challenges. And when my brother was struggling, we couldn't find services that could meet him where he was. And we couldn't house him because of where he was at currently in his life. So after a day or so of getting some hygiene services and food at one of our homes, I'm the youngest of 8, he was number 3. So there were a few of us around. He would want to go back out. And that's where he felt, that's just where he was living. And so it really woke me up to just how complex this is. And that's why I speak to the fact that sometimes we have to meet people on the ground where they are. And we can't always just assume that giving someone keys is going to be a solution. When my brother was struggling, he needed access to low barrier services. I want to ensure you what happened to my brother does happen to a lot of Portlanders. And I approach my work toward houselessness with this memory in my mind, but also with this motivation in my heart. The fact is, a houseless community is not one story. Every Portlander experiencing houselessness has a different story, a different perspective, and needs a different solution for their own circumstances. There are definitely no quick fix, silver bullet solutions. We have a tendency to take something really complex and then we want to solve it with something simple. That's why I believe in meeting people where they are and providing a multitude of options for our houseless neighbors. All too often, the trauma of houselessness leads to despair, a sense of disempowerment, and I always would feel the shame that my brother had. And we'd always reassure him that we loved him, but you could just feel that shame and that hopelessness. I believe in empowering our houseless community with the ability to choose where they want to live so they can find their best, most restorative place that meets their unmet needs. And that's why I'm incredibly excited to be here with all of you today and tell you a little bit about the work that I've been doing since I got into office. Actually, I want to start with in October of 2020. I began meeting with a national organization called Community Solutions. They work to provide current data with hundreds of cities across the country regarding the houselessness challenge. In my career, I found how important it is to have really crisp and clear data sets, because I've always found if you know where you are, it's a lot easier to know where you're going. And it's been a heavy lift. And I definitely want to thank Commissioner Meieran for helping to get that over the finish line, and other members of the executive committee with Home for Everyone. This is never a gotcha or a shame moment. It's about just being transparent and dispassionately honest about what is going on in our community. Then in January, my office launched the Streets to Stability Task Force. Now, why would I want to create a task force internally at City Hall about this issue? Well, it's because in my onboarding, I was meeting with bureau directors about something completely unrelated. And I asked them at the end of the meeting, I said, well, how is houselessness impacting your bureau? And I never had so much top of mind, authentic dialogue in my first 2 months in the City Hall. And after listening to some emotional testimony, if you will, I asked, how often do you have this conversation? Where is this conversation taking place? And then they were a little quiet and said, well, this is actually the first time we've had this dialogue amongst all of ourselves. That's just to say that this crisis is impacting every bureau in the city. And when we try to keep it inside one silo, like the joint office, we're never going to get it done. So we've been meeting, we've had 9 meetings, and we're getting into the heart of the matter. So when we make decisions and we take action, we're not in that challenge of one bureau saying this and another bureau saying that, which means there's no action at all. And so this is what it's like to work at City Hall. And I think anyone that's been tuning in for a while is not surprised about that. Thank you for listening to the very glamorous part of what it's like to be a city commissioner. As you know, and with the support of Commissioner Meieran and the Chair Kafori, I can say that my colleagues on the City Council, we are developing safe rest villages. Commissioner Meieran outlined some of the services that you'd want at those safe rest villages. And this would be for our unhoused neighbors throughout the city. I've requested and hope to receive full support for $20 million from the American Rescue Plan to create these managed villages on land made available by the Shelter to Housing Continuum code changes that our colleagues and I unanimously landed that policy at the end of April. I recognize some of you from your testimony. As you know, we have the big picture policy. Now we need to move into implementation. We will provide safe, sanitary spaces for our houseless neighbors to live until they have access to additional wraparound services and ultimately sustained housing. These villages will provide essential baseline services, as was mentioned earlier, sanitation, hygiene, case management, provided by the contractors through the county. These villages will provide a stability that our houseless neighbors need, and they will be a critical step for our entire community's public health. This initiative will be accompanied by an ordinance that all 5 council offices have been working on for weeks through my Streets to Stability Task Force. And again, I'm looking forward to sharing with you more details. I know there's also been a lot of misinformation about this initiative that's just barely brewing and have been shared in the community as the city council moves to finalize our efforts. So I want to be clear about a few elements of this plan. First, when it comes to the revised sanitation protocols that the entire city council signed up on, we're proposing not massive effort to sweep camps. These are protocols created with feedback from Multnomah County Public Health Division, and after weeks of input from all 5 offices, the number one goal is to reduce the negative impacts on our houseless neighbors and their health. I think a lot of people recall when COVID hit and we were told to shelter in place, we stopped doing some of those services. And so we're catching up. It's because we want to have healthy streets for our houseless neighbors. I also want to be clear that the city of Portland does not intend to use to increase law enforcement presence for potential relocations. I know firsthand from my brother that involving law enforcement is often the most terrifying for houseless Portlanders. And my goal, and I know you share this with me, many of you, is that we create community safety, not to perpetuate fear. Second, we will be engaging communities and practicing transparency. Excuse me, transparency as we locate new public and private property for these villages. Like every meeting I'm in over the last 2 weeks, I ask people if they have a parking lot that they can create for these safe villages. So just know that when you reach out to my office, I will ask you. People often stigmatize Portlanders experiencing houselessness, and I want to break down that stigma. and I know a lot of you do too. I want to see our community come together and welcome these new villages in their neighborhoods. Houselessness affects every one of us. And it's time for us to open up our doors, our metaphorical doors, and most importantly, our hearts to the neighbors in need. And third, I want to be clear that this effort is a stepping stone. Permanent, stable, sustained, affordable housing and building the resilience of our houseless neighbors is the goal. The path to sustained housing is not linear. It's a very interesting continuum. It goes a little bit more like this. It's called life. We need to meet people where they are. We need to provide choice. We need to provide services. We need to break down the silos. We need current data, and we need to learn from one another in order to solve this crisis together. There's a lot of you on this call tonight. Are you in? Is Portland ready to do this? Yes. I look forward to answering your questions a bit later, but right now I have the honor of bringing another voice into the room. I've had the pleasure of being on a lot of Zooms with Raven. I look so forward to meeting you live someday soon. And I get to turn over the virtual room to you, Raven Drake. Take it away. Oh, did I mess up? Is it really you, Kaia, that I should have turned it over to?
We just had, yeah, I'll just do a little bit and then I'll pass the baton over to Raven. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Yeah, so I really appreciate Representative Reynolds bringing us together tonight and doing this across constituencies or across jurisdictions. And I think one of the things that's really powerful and I really like to lead with is that Representative Reynolds is recognizing that by representing downtown and Old Town, that unhoused people are her constituents. And this is something we feel really strongly about at Street Roots is the civic engagement. And Raven will get more into that. But I wanted to just start off with a few things and then I'll give kind of a broad strokes introduction that Raven's going to take away and go much further with. This is an enormous moment. I don't know if you're all feeling that, but you know, there's a record number of money, both with our Metro, you know, services measure and also with federal money. And there's, you know, more federal money down the road. You know, the fact that the Biden administration's working on the American Jobs Plan and talking about housing as infrastructure, I think is a really helpful framework. I've been thinking about this notion of infrastructure in a lot of different ways, in ways of hygiene and sanitation too. But I also think it's really important to recognize that while we have new opportunities now that we haven't had in this region in terms of the amount of funding, that we're also dealing, you know, we're dealing with the aspects of homelessness that are visible and the homelessness that's not visible, but we're also always grappling with forces that lead to homelessness that are so much bigger than our region. And, you know, systemic racism, chasms between poverty and housing costs, the fact that even before the pandemic, a third of the people in Multnomah County didn't have enough income to meet basic needs. The fact that, you know, as the moratoriums end and we have this you know, state legislation that's passed, that we still have so many people that are risking homelessness through eviction, that we have so many Black and Indigenous families because of average incomes that are absolutely priced out of our region. The fact that climate crises, right, are increasing homelessness. We saw that through our fires. So just recognizing that, of course, we keep trying, we have to be indefatigable, but the piecemeal is not enough, right? It's transformational change that we need. So I'm going to just touch on one thread that's important from the vantage point of Street Roots to enter into any of these conversations. And that's because of what we hear and witness and have for 22 years. And that's issues around criminalization, because that is a force on homelessness. That's why we double down on areas of sweeps. And Commissioner Ryan, I know we have our lively discussions, but this I feel very strongly about is we've seen patterns where public health is always used as a reason for sweeps. And so we see that pattern and then we see what it actually plays out to be. That's why we double down. And then the ever-present legal system in which, you know, over that we see since 2017, the data shows over half of the people arrested have been unhoused. And that's why we are so absolutely tenacious about Portland Street Response and not overburdening Portland Street Response with outcomes, because actually what we're fighting for is what we'll never see. We're fighting for what doesn't happen. We're fighting for, and Raven and Gary and many others can speak to this, we're fighting for, the absolute need to not have people go to jail, get misdemeanors, and get felonies. And then what we see so much is how people can't get employment or into housing. So it's just something we have to say again and again and again, is that we need to be changing our system, because this is another part of preventing homelessness. So I'm going to just say something broadly about Street Roots and what the pandemic has meant. And what that has meant for Street Roots is we've turned more and not less to unhoused people than ever before. Because I think what happened for us is, in this time of our society of recognizing essential labor and public health workers, we thought that in both cases, we have people on the streets who can move into those roles. That's why Gary's working at Street Roots. He brings leadership and expertise and passion and aptitudes that are not despite of his experiences, but because of his experiences. So I think the thing I really want to emphasize is that I believe very strongly that by hearing stories, we can bring in the heart from the stories and we can open our hearts. But I think it's also really important to recognize that what we're actually talking about is expertise and leadership, and that unhoused people contributing to policy making is what we're fighting for every day. Raven can get into much more of this in terms of the work we're trying to do, where unhoused people directly influence policy making, and the ways in which unhoused people throughout the pandemic have been doing this sort of frontline work of public health around vaccines, COVID awareness, taking care of each other outside, and are going to now move into doing that around the fires. So I'm going to turn it over to Raven. Raven created a program, the first program in 22 years at Street Roots, the Ambassador Program. And I am so incredibly in awe of her and proud of her. So Raven Drake, take it away.
Thank you, Kaia. I've always decided if I ever run for public office, you can be my publicist. Hello, everyone. I guess I want to start by just giving you a little bit of how I came to Portland. I'm not native to Portland. I grew up in Mississippi and Ohio, and that's actually where I came out as transgender in 2012. And in a state that was very backwards thinking to that community, I spent the next 6 years attempting to transition and suffering assaults, loss of job, loss of housing, until I came to the solution that I effectively chose to be houseless. And I'm one of the very unique ones who got on the bus knowing I'd be houseless when I got here, and made that choice knowingly, because coming to Portland was an access point to me, the services I never had, to a community that I had no link to back in Ohio. And I showed up Christmas Eve 2019. And the first few weeks on the street for me were very tumultuous time. I'd never been unhoused before. I'd always had a friend I could lean on, or a couch I could go surf. So this was very new to me. And I thankfully had a really good friend of 24 years who was associated with Street Roots, who walked me in. And it became that saving grace, because I had not come out to transition. I had come out to pass through Portland on my way to the coast to end my life. I was done. And walking in the Street Roots and getting to meet everyone there, not only staff, but all the vendors who I've gotten to know and are part of my family, and all the people living around me on the street, it caused me to reconsider those own unconscious biases that I had had growing up of who unhoused people were. I saw more humanity and charity in people who had nothing than I had in multiple years of living in apartments and houses. And it opened my eyes to new possibilities. And I started to listen to their stories. As I watched the virus coming down, I had two campmates who were immunocompromised. And I knew it was only a matter of time before this virus crossed down into Oregon. It was already in Washington. And I relied back on 3 combat tours as a Navy corpsman that I spent in Iraq. And I just became Doc again. I walked up and down the I-5 corridor and I started giving people whatever I could and helping. And through that, Street Roots found out, and this whole adventure started. But I got introduced to people who were also doing this work, who have spent years, some of them decades, out here doing this work. I got to meet people who have lived out here for decades and got to understand who they are and what barriers they face. And the more I understood, the more I realized that there were other ways we could do this, that there were amazing people and voices out there that, given a platform and a time and an opportunity to step forward and share their knowledge with us, it could help to move us in those directions and heal those wounds. And so for me, the ambassador program became that embodiment of becoming a group of individuals that I could work with, that we could work with. We could introduce to other outreach teams and workers, to other programs, to help them build their own base of knowledge and their own, and be able to spread their wings, and for us to be able to support them as they stepped forward and learned their voice again, and learned that they had so much left to give the city and their communities and the world around them, and that they were not this narrative they had lived under, but they were simply needing someone to give them a hand and help them over that barrier and let them continue on their path. And so the ambassador program was born with this ideal that we could create an opportunity for people to learn new skills and also teach us new skills and new empathy and new ways of life, to share their ideals on stages that historically, for unhoused individuals, things like this for me and Gary, coming from the unhoused community, is kind of hard to get in front of. We learn things through our support of the C3PO camps and working with the city to build those villages. Good and bad lessons were learned through that whole thing. And one lesson that stuck with me is, we've talked about it this evening, how there is no cookie cutter solution to houselessness. There's so many varying factors and nuances of how someone becomes houseless and how they will recover from it, that there's no way to build one system that's just kind of a one fit all. And so what we have found through these experiences, what I have found personally for these experiences, is that by adding those houseless individuals, by coming to that community and sitting down with them and getting their voice, their perspective, and allowing them the choice to have a self-determinative model of how their life recovers, to have a plethora of choices that allows them to pick something that is comfortable for them, because that comfortability of where you live influences how much you can recover. When Commissioner Ryan was talking about his brother, if he could have gotten his brother into a housing situation where he was comfortable, he has a 75% more chance than most people who are living out on the streets to recover, to get those wraparound services, to feel comfortable enough to talk to people. And you first have to have somewhere comfortable, and simply having a roof over your head's not enough. Many people are right. It's those wraparound services that kind of make this self-determinative model where we support people in those walks, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's mental health, learning new skills so that they can get a job, which is kind of an area that we have kind of placed ourselves in with the paper, and being able to give people a low barrier income opportunity. Is we looked within through this pandemic, and so much of the leadership, when the staff couldn't be there, was coming out of those unhoused vendors, that caused the entirety of the organization to take stock of where we were and change direction from where we were going. We started to add those voices more into every level of our organization and the discussion. And through that, of adding them, we have more profoundly and more diversely increased our voice and where we're going. We have seen within us that by adding all those voices together and making this opportunity available for people to architect a future of their own making, that we have seen some of the most beautiful transitions, not only inside us, but out throughout the neighborhoods and communities we've been able to work with. We've been able to foster civic engagement in certain neighborhoods that we've already worked in, and be able to support those neighborhoods in reaching out to that community and actually sitting down with the unhoused community and learning exactly what their needs are. But not only their needs, but being able to express that community's need for that unhoused community to help keep trash clean, to help work with them to keep the streets safe. And learning that we are one larger community. Some of us live outside, some of us are in house, but we are all part of the same community. And no matter where you go, I think the most offensive word I've ever heard around houselessness is the word transient. Most of us are never transient. We have a neighborhood we lived in. I lived off the I-5 corridor. That was my neighborhood. I know many people who have spent the last few decades living around Old Town. That is their neighborhood. We live in communities. We want to be a part of those communities. And so it's time for us as those communities to reevaluate how we view community across the city. And I thank you for this time to speak.
Wow, thank you so much, Raven. Yeah, I think we're doing some cheering, and there's been, again, we'll get the chat to you, lots of really nice comments in the chat while you were speaking, you know, thanking you and cheering you on and high-fiving you. And so thank you so much. We are, so we're all here for a while longer, even though Kaia told me the Blazers might be starting soon. But anyway, no, we're here for this now. We're here for questions and answers. And a lot of folks had sent questions in ahead of time. I know there's some questions in the chat. So we will get to, you know, as much as we can in the next, 30, 40 minutes. And thank you all for being here. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who's the moderator of the question and answer.
Thank you, Rep. Reynolds, and thank you, Raven and Gary, for sharing your stories. I think everybody is very moved, so really, thank you. Our first question tonight, and it's a combination of a few different things, or a few different people have asked about it. Barbara from ahead of time, John and Andy in the chat. But there is a lot of discussion around how houselessness is affected by our behavioral health crisis, our mental health addiction, the lack of resources around there. So I wanted each of the representative and both commissioners to speak a little bit about how behavioral health plays into it, Gary and Raven as well, and Kaia, and to talk a little bit about how each of their respective agencies, each of their respective bodies is both, what are their plans to help with those wraparound services and to help with those causes in general, and what can we be doing more of in each of their respective bodies. So Commissioner Meieran, let's start with you.
Thank you, Joe. And this is a question that's very near and dear to my heart. One of my highest priorities, one of the reasons that I actually ran to be a county commissioner, was to address a lot of the the dysfunction of our so-called mental health system in general. There are tremendous issues there to begin with, and they are probably most visible, most acute for people who are living houseless and who are basically in the fishbowl of the world that everyone can see. There are, as Representative Reynolds alluded to earlier, there are tremendous issues, mental health and substance use disorder issues. Collectively, we refer to those as behavioral health, that play out on our streets. And sometimes people can become houseless because they have some of these issues and can't sustain housing, and then living outside only. I mean, it's the trauma, what the violence, all of the threats, all of what people experience makes so much worse. And then maybe you might do substance use to stay up at night and be vigilant. So if sexually assaulted and attacked, maybe you need to take some other drugs so that you're self-medicating, the voices in your head, whatever. There is so much going on that exacerbate underlying mental health issues. And it's hard enough to get mental health treatment, to be honest, if you're sitting comfortably in a house somewhere, in your apartment. But to be on the streets and not have access to a phone, not be in a reliable location often, not be able to take medications, to be in constant threat that you're going to be moved or not be able to sleep, all of this compounds that trauma and the mental health issues. The county is the local mental health authority. And as such, we do have a number of services that do outreach and connection with people who have behavioral health issues living outside. There's a couple of fantastic programs through Cascadia Behavioral Health that do crisis outreach. So Project Respond, just mental health, daily mental health outreach to connect with people. Then there's also what we call ACT teams, assertive community engagement. They're the ACT, I don't know the acronym, but these teams provide intensive supportive mental health services for people, supposed to be given to people when they have housing, because that's how they work the best. But in our community, they are, I think it's over 50% or something, are with people who are unhoused. And so we don't have enough of any of this. We need to be investing more and getting people to places where they can actually receive some of the services. And it is such an essential part of what's happening. We need more availability of services. We need more places for people to go. We need more ways to meet people where they're at. Sorry, there's so much here, but appreciate the question. It's a big issue.
And I will say, I will mirror Sharon. I'm also a female physician elected official, along with Maxine Dexter. But anyway, and of course, Commissioner Meieran. The mental health crisis was a huge motivator for me running for office. And I will say at the state level, we are really working with Representative Nose, who I know has spoken with Commissioner Meieran. We really are working to do some transformative behavioral health investments. I mean, close to $500 million over the next 2 years at the state level. And obviously this is all to be, knit together with what the good work the county's already doing, but needs a lot more of the same. The workforce issue is just very, very difficult, in large part because this work tends to not pay very well, social workers and stuff. If anyone else has anything to add to that, please feel free.
Sure, I'll just say a few things. I think we all just need to remember that, our state is ranked 51st in mental health system in the country. And so we should be humbled by that. It's great to hear about a $500,000 investment, and money is a factor, but there's got to be something wrong with the way the system is set up. So when you talk to major healthcare providers, they can't even answer a direct question about service delivery. And so, and I know that the stigma in Oregon is 500 million. Did I say 500,000? I'm trying not to look at the chat, but I'm glad I saw that. My point is, we have to have the courage to get the right people in the room that don't all agree with each other, that aren't the people that are just going to get the paycheck or get the contract, but we need people with lived experience. We need people from all sectors to really tackle this. and not be afraid to admit that we have nowhere to go but up. But that's what's happening in our state. And it's mind-boggling to me that we've allowed this to occur. And I'm not saying that mental health is the only reason. It's not the only factor. I'm well aware of that. I'm just saying that the chronically houseless people on the streets that have been homeless for more than 2 years and have dual diagnosis are the most challenging people to meet where they are and to build resilience with. And we just have to accept the complexity of that. And so I hope that as a state and as a city, we can really lean in to lifting the stigma of mental health and being all in for a very different creative approach going forward. But there's something systemically wrong that we continue to be at the bottom of in the nation when it comes to mental health services, period.
Thank you, Commissioner, for
And
that.
I think Gary was going to jump in. I just wanted to make sure.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Kai. Yes, Gary.
Okay, here we go. I was muted. Yeah, the reason why I would like to make a comment about this, I deal with mental health issues myself, and I have an ex-wife that's dealing with it, and I'm dealing with that today as I speak. And for me to be diagnosed schizoaffected and bipolar and ADHD, it was real difficult for me to be met at my point. It really took a dramatic event for me to open up and be willing to take that next step. So what I mean by this, for y'all to know, there needs to be some kind of system set in place where these people don't fall through the cracks and get worse and worse and worse, and then they harm themselves, they kill somebody, or they kill themselves. And that's basically where they head to, because that's where I was headed. I call it my committee, having like 12 voices in your head at one time doesn't leave you much space for self. And it becomes very aggravating. It makes you very dysfunctional. That's why you see people out on the street screaming and yelling, because that's probably what 9 times out of 10, that's what's going on. It could be something else. And then people need to take time and kind of validate these people's story. You don't have to say disbelieve it, or you crazy, because no, they're not crazy. We need to change that term to being in a different conscious level, because that's definitely what it is, and that allows them to feel more comfortable and feel more human and feel a part of rather than a dispart. So it's just like there's a lot of people out there that are unhoused, they're going through those crises, but the major thing I think I worry about is the women out there in Portland. Um, they get 3 times more trauma than the men. They get raped, they get beat up, they get their stuff took. They don't have as much sheltering. They don't have there needs to be some kind of program set in place just for the women that are going through this trauma. Because if they don't get the trauma treated, they continue to get worse and worse and worse, and they start believing in the events that take place, and they start having flashbacks. It's a long journey, it's a hard journey, and the only person who can make themselves well again is that individual. But they have to have people that believe in them and trust in them and support them, no matter what they do. They need that support. And that's one thing I think all people need to take in consideration when they think about the mental issue. It's just a different level of consciousness. That Einstein, most of the greats heard voices. Martin Luther King heard voices, JFK. Look, just take that note and say, wow, all these men that made great contributions to our world were in different levels of consciousness. People back then call them crazy, but they're still in the history book as great accomplishers. So that's all I wanted to make a note on. Remember those things, and that might help open you up a little bit more to receive and think of what kind of programs do we really want to put in place. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Gary. And as someone said in the chat, thank you also for kind of speaking about the challenges of being a woman, a houseless woman.
Mhm.
So I was reading the chat and people like, so what is it you're going to do? I'm like, they've just said what they're going to do. So I guess I'm going to get real with you, Commissioner Meieran and Commissioner Ryan. What do you think? I mean, I think from what I've understood in talking with both of you and in hearing what you've said tonight, this short-term plan to get people into alternate shelters, and that means tiny home villages, organized campgrounds, and if I'm not saying this right, so that we at least have a really viable option for people who are sleeping on our sidewalks. Is that going to be happening in the next 3 to 6 months?
So I can start and we'll segue with Commissioner Ryan. Hopefully we will be a seamless description of this. So you're exactly right, Representative. So no, not 3 to 6 months, I would say. But I would say that we are going to be launching what needs to be done within that time. Like there will be capacity dedicated, and I'm going to let Commissioner Ryan speak some to his plan, but there will be people who will be dedicated to doing this work. We need the people to be dedicated to doing this work, to find the place, to locations, to get things cited, to build out the units. I do have a on the website that gives a plan. Would take about 6 months to get to the number of sites and continuum of sites that I talk about. And then people move in, and a key would be to facilitate that and help people with their stuff, so they're not, it's not taken away, people don't lose their pets, etc. So this could be done efficiently and effectively, and we need the political will to do it. I think that for the first time, some of this is galvanizing. There has been tremendous support. And Tim McCormick, it is on my website, and which is at Multnomah County. I'll get to that. Oh, thank you, Lisa, the Commissioner, Representative Reynolds. But there is work that we can do in the short term to address this immediate humanitarian crisis and do harm reduction to get people so they are not living in these conditions that are unsafe and unhealthy, that they can be supported. So that's the short term, immediate, over years. That should make a difference sort of in real time, urgently. And we have the long time picture. This is where we always hear it's taken decades to get to this point. It is going to take years, realistically, to get to the point where we have enough supportive housing and affordable housing to really make that significant difference in people getting the housing they need, getting some rent assistance, getting all the services, etc. So what we need to be doing, though, is acting in real time as we're doing the work for the long term. And I think about this kind of as an ER doctor, because what we do is we triage the emergency that comes in and address those needs as we're still managing our other patients who have needs concurrently and will be needing further stuff to happen. And so the way I'm approaching this in our budget at the county and the budget, how we operationalize the work we want to do, there was not an funding specifically allocated to this in our county budget. I am advocating for us to be funding this, to put an amendment in our budget, which the reality is we adopted June 3rd. And anyone who wants to support this concept of alternative shelter and supporting that, you can write to your county commissioners and say, we support this. And in working with the city on their plan, because the city will maybe doing a lot of the infrastructure work around that. But again, we need to integrate and support each other, because again, we're all in this together. So there is an immediate way this could be done. I believe that hopefully there will be things happening. Segue to you, Commissioner Ryan, and that the county will be working to support this work and the long-term efforts we really need to permanently prevent people from becoming unhoused and transition them out quickly if they do.
Thank you, Commissioner Meieran. First of all, this work that we're doing, it's not like Dan Ryan's plan, Commissioner Meieran's plan. We have to get a body of electeds to align and move work forward. And that's why I was trying to give you some of that methodical steps that have been taking place at the city so that we can actually move the work and not have these fits and starts that I think Portlanders are sick and tired of. And I also want to say that we're on the shoulders of some providers that I've noticed when I look at who's been joining this. They've been doing amazing work for decades with very limited resources. So the fact that we have the Metro Here Together measure, we have the rescue dollars that come in, this is our moment in time to get it right. And so it's really exciting to see everyone's excitement about that. That's what I'm going to be an optimist and say that I'm experiencing tonight, and that you can all get behind how this is a shared opportunity and a shared sacrifice throughout the city. With that said, I am excited also to say that with COVID compliance people starting to get vaccinated, we will start to ease some of the restrictions in some of the hotels, and we have vouchers for rent. The joint office says we can get 1,300 people off the streets by July of this year, just in terms of moving people into where we had more physical distancing. In terms of the villages that I was talking about earlier, these are, I would like to call safe rest villages with the services that will allow the community in those villages to, yes, build some of their own resilience and also build relationship with the case managers. That will start to really take off this fall. And so, did I say July 2021? I mean, by this next year, the joint office will be able to get 1,300 people housed. This fall, we will be able to start building and locating these villages. And if the rescue dollars come in for this effort, if I can get 5-0 vote on that, I think that's the goal, then you should start to see the building and infrastructure, which the city has a lot of responsibility to drive and get that set up. And then we partner with the county to provide the mental health services, the other managed care services, the jobs program services, so that we start to see people being served. And then we will start to see people move in to the housing bond that was passed both by Metro and the city is ahead of schedule. And we are building a lot of low income and affordable housing units as well. So you put all of these things together and you will start to see a lot of action starting in the fall and really accelerating over the next 3 years. But like Commissioner Meieran said, we didn't get here overnight, and we will need to all come together to be a part of the solution.
Great. And I will say at the end of tonight's event, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get involved, how you can reach out to your electeds, and we will be following up with an email to everyone who registered for this event with that information.
Yes,
I'd
thank
love
you.
to add one last
Yeah.
thing. What Commissioner Ryan was talking about is that these are long, lengthy steps that are coming up that we're going to have to take as an entirety of a community in Portland to rectify this. And so with the amazing service providers who are on here, who I'm happy to know most of them and get to work with a lot of them and learn from them, we must focus on not only adding their voice, but going to the street, going to those people who will live in these, who will be affected by these, and centering the voice of those unhoused individuals and their experiences and how we shape this construction and this plan of how we recover as one community.
Hear, hear, Raven. That is awesome. Thank you. I think we're all committed to that.
Thank you, Raven. Thank you, Rep. Reynolds. I want to do a question that we got ahead of time, but oftentimes the discussion around houselessness is centered around people who are over the age of 18, adults. But how does the houselessness crisis right now in Portland affect our most vulnerable population, as in children and young adults. And Rep. Reynolds, I want to start with you.
Thank you for that question. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a pediatrician, so certainly the health and safety of children and the health and safety of everyone is very important to me, but I do have a particular soft spot for children because we know that trauma in childhood has lifelong consequences. And when we think about houselessness in children, I think it's definitely, I think, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Meieran and Commissioner Ryan, or maybe even Kaia Sand, Executive Director, to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we talk about housing insecurity in children, I think that's close to 20,000 kids in the state are housing insecure, where they're doubled up in homes with family, or they are actually unhoused, living on the streets, or they're in shelters. And we know that kids who experience this type of trauma, who are in homes where their parents are experiencing what we call toxic stress, that it's very, very difficult and very, very concerning. And it increases the chance of that child having developmental delays and learning issues. Shelters, for the most part, are not designed for families. In fact, often adult males can't be in the same shelter as adult females. So it makes it very, very difficult for families to find short-term shelter. So this is definitely another clearing call to action. And now I'll ask one of the commissioners to weigh in.
I can step in here a bit. This is, this is an area where we need to do so much more work and get to the prevention side of things even more quickly, because again, once a child, a youth ends up houseless, then that just compounds trauma and so much more. And there are much more tragic outcomes. And at Multnomah County, we actually have, through our Department of County Human Services and connections through behavioral health, we partner with other organizations in the community to have what's it called, the Youth Homeless Continuum. And this group really comes together around youth issues to try to create a safety net that is tighter maybe than our other safety nets, to try to catch kids, to provide services, to provide places for them to go. And we need to do more. We need to do more in the homes so that that kids don't become homeless. We need to do more in our schools to be able to catch things. I mean, this is something we need to absolutely put all our effort into addressing.
One little layer I wanted to add too is that the child tax credit that's on the federal level that came through, it's a temporary one, begins in July. I think things like that are really important to realize how much they matter. That is it $300 per child, but that the level per month, right? That that families who are homeless could get basic income is so important, right? I mean, all income, the difference between minimum wage and housing wage is vast. Housing wage in Portland is about $24 an hour. So when you look at families that are split up among services and they're trying to get things to work, maybe someone is working, at Subway and their family's living in a car, right? These are the kinds of realities that are happening. So I often think, an important piece of this conversation is always income and how we're making sure that income gets to families. That said, it's hard to get to families that are homeless. It's hard to get to people who are homeless. Street Roots, the whole pandemic, we've been focused on the stimulus money. So we've been having folks who are vendors, but also all unhoused folks come here and Zoom in with the low income tax clinic to actually get their stimulus money mailed here, because otherwise they would miss out on it. And it was about $700,000 that we were able to get into the pockets of people. So I just want to emphasize the scale, right, of things like this and how much that basic income matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Yeah, I was just going to say yes.
Yeah, I've been very focused on the mobilization of students. The fact is, with the teachers in East County and in school districts where they might have 90% free and reduced lunch, they would always say it was the fact that 50% of their students would turn over every year. So it's not always that they're homeless, it's the mobility, it's the couch surfing, and it's that lack of stability. And I will say that in my conversations and the action I'm seeing from the Housing Bureau with the Joint Office is a lot of focus on stabilization of families first and foremost. So that is a priority. And I think what doesn't get enough attention is actually the foster age children or the queer children that get kicked out of their houses at 14 and 15. And Portland is a welcoming place for that audience. And so thank goodness we have places like New Avenues for Youth that directly focus on that audience. But we also, and Representative Reynolds knows this very well because she's in it, but the way we support youth between the ages of 18 and 24 that don't have parents that provide extra support. Anyone who's raised children knows that you're not off the hook at 18. And so that you must continue to support them. But if you're a foster child, you're basically cut off. And so a lot of our houseless teens are from the foster system, and that's been going on for decades. And Portland is a welcoming place for that. But I do think that we need to continue to listen to the good people at Outside In, at New Avenues, and continue to promote the career development for the youth there so that they can build their resilience at a young age and don't become chronically houseless. So I have a big place in my heart for the 18 to 24-year-olds that systemically have just been treated horribly in our system throughout the country.
Oh my gosh, that's such an excellent point, Commissioner Ryan. And I did want to just say a few things. It's like, as soon as Kaia said that about like money, like people need money. And it is great that our country is going to be giving, I think if you're under 3, if you have children under 3, they each get $300 a month for a year. And then 3 to whatever, 8, what is it? Oh, anyway, it's $250 a month for a year. So, and we're hoping that this becomes a permanent, as it should. So, and Kaia and I were also part of an event, when was that, 6 months ago, just about this whole idea of, first of all, criminalizing the poor, which I believe Raven talked about that. I can't remember who talked about what now. I believe that was you, Raven. But also the systemic forces that keep poor people poor. And it's pretty awful. And so that's a whole other discussion and how we need to redo our entire tax code, but we will do that. I think we have time for about one more question, then we're going to just take a few minutes talking about action items and follow up with, we'll be following up with everyone with an email. Mm-hmm. Joe.
Yes, thank you, Representative. This one is more pointed towards Commissioner Ryan, but there was a recent lawsuit made against the city of Portland from 4 houseless people who claimed that they had their property taken by city contractors. Can you speak a little bit about that lawsuit and just what, I guess, personal property means in the larger discussion of this?
Yeah, I've learned a thing or two since I've been in office, and one is that you don't speak specifically to lawsuits in a public forum. And I'm just, I'm just doing what I'm told right here. So that's my response at this moment.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah. One that we could actually answer. Yeah.
And this one is from a few different people in the chat and some from that we got before. But when talking about these safe rest villages, these alternate shelter spaces. Many advocates have talked about some self-governing principles within these spaces. What are each speaker's respective thoughts on how self-governance will play into this larger picture? And we can start with Commissioner Meieran.
Thanks, Joe. And I would like to say, I mean, in my vision, which, it depends how things are ultimately implemented, but I would see a range of different types of sites. I am very supportive of self-governing models, such as Dignity Village and some others. And I also have learned from people living in some of these places that that there are problems when there isn't some sort of a governance or other kind of a structure. I think we need, again, to meet people where they're at. And as Raven said, we need to be engaging the people who are actually going to be living in these communities to find out what they would want to see. There are some very successful models along all of the continuum, and what we need to do is what is effective and what meets people's needs, and that's what I would say.
I'll just jump in really quickly. I think that we have such a history that we can always draw from, and we have local folks from Ibrahim Mubarak to Leo Rhodes,
Yes,
who have set up governing structures in these self-governed Right to Dream 2. Early Ibrahim Mubarak did that with Dignity Village. Hazelnut Grove, Barbie's on the call, Barbie Weber, and she's been a part of that governance. So we have such a wealth of knowledge in our community.
yeah.
I would just add that there's a dialogue about the size of the villages, and I think that is a factor in how to create this. Let's say it's just like anything, the more empowered you are to build your resilience, the better off you're going to be in terms of building enough resilience to move on in life and become sustained, and hopefully in housing. So I think to build that resilience in a self-governing model is ideal. And that's why we want to offer services that meet them on their edges, so that we sustain hygiene and we sustain sanitation, and then we offer management services, case management services, so that we can start to get to know everyone individually. So I think it's an and. So there are services that come, and there's also self-governing. It's a combination.
Great. Well, we're going to move towards a little bit. We have a slide, I think, Maida, about ways you all can get involved, whether it's, I think, reaching out to your elected officials, including the people on this event, and we will be sending out everyone's email address. Street Roots comes out every week. It's been really nice. Kaia, how long has it been since you guys have been back to selling actual hard copies of Street Roots? Because you
started
had
in August again, once we had a strong sense, I think, as a community, of what it took to stay safe.
Yeah. So I know I get mine at my new seasons, outside my new seasons. Several people in the chat did comment on the Rose City resource published by Street Roots. And I know that, and great resource for those of listing the services in the area. Blanchette House, which is also in Old Town, welcomes volunteers to bring Saturday lunches, and their website has a lot of information on that. Rahab Sisters is an organization that's near and dear to me, in addition to Street Roots. It's on the east side, prepares food and does outreach, and creates community for women and gender nonconforming. They've also been doing quite a bit of outreach during the pandemic, on Sundays, going out to unhoused people in their communities, and then they prepare and serve food Fridays at a church on Southeast 82nd. And then solve, we all know that there's a we could have a whole other conversation about the trash that's part of the homeless issue. And then volunteering with Hygiene for All. One of the resources I want to make sure people know about is the one call. If you're seeing that there is a encampment that seems to be really struggling to manage some of the garbage in the community, the city sends out people with lived experiences who really gently and beautifully helps folks clean up their campsite so that it's a little bit safer. I think we can take the
Representative, could I just add?
Yes.
That, yeah, we really, we want to build these, and we will build these villages, these safe rest villages, and there will be pushback. And they're going to be needed all throughout the city. So we need all of you, the compassionate people that are on this call at this hour, to really charge your friends and neighbors to become a part of the solution and be part of being helpful in terms of helping create these villages in your neighborhoods. We all know what we're dealing with now, and that's not good. The status quo is not okay. And so helping us build villages that actually have services and that have compassion and that give people a shot, you can all be a part of the solution, is my point. And so I hope that when we start finding parcels of land and when we start to deal with inevitable pushback, I hope that you'll be at those meetings saying that you're willing to work with the new residents. They're not going to be new. The residents in your neighborhood that are now have an opportunity to be receiving compassionate, humane services that allow them to move forward in life. I really think that you could be part of that solution. I wanted to say that, and I hope you all have a great night. It's been wonderful to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. And I will say, thank you all so much for being here. There's a lot of wonderful love and work and energy going into making life better for every Portlander and every Oregonian. And that'll be my final word. But I'm letting other people say final words. And I will just say, sorry, it's not gonna be my final word. I plan to reconvene this group or a group like this in 3 or 4 months, and let's see where we are on this front. Let's reconnect and make sure we're moving that football down the field, to use a non-basketball sports analogy. But I think, and let's build each other up and support each other and touch base more often. Commissioner Meieran, and anyone else wants to, I felt like you had a good close there, Dan, but you can say something more if you would like.
That was pretty good. That was a pretty, yeah. Just thank you.
I'm into the Blazer game now, so I'm almost. And I'm not looking. I don't even want to know, but
yeah. Kaia or Raven or
I was just gonna say, so I'm really happy to see our Rose City Resource Manager is making a comment with more links about Rose City Resource, and she's doing a great job. Thank you so much, Representative Reynolds, for pulling us all together.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
I wanted to echo that. Thank you so much for pulling us together and for hosting such an important topic. And I think it becomes almost marching orders for all of us as we go away from this to take stock of where we are in our own version of community and how we come together, because it'll take each one of us to be a part of that solution. So I just hope everybody, as they go home and digest this information, take what they've heard and use it as a rallying cry within themselves to look for more ways to be impactful in their community.
Yeah.
You're making me a little choked up there, Raven. Yes, Gary, sorry.
All I want to say is thank you for bringing us together and having an opportunity to share our experience, our strengths, and our hopes. My major hope is that we find funding to help train these programs that will foster the unhoused people to get the necessary training to be productive. And the most important thing I want everybody to remember these words, because these words might save our lives. People helping people.
Thank you, Gary. That is the note to leave on. Thank you all so very much. Have a great rest of your evening.
All right. Take care of each other. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. See you later, Kaia.
Yeah, Gary, I was just gonna bring you up on GChat. Thank you. This was really lovely.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kaia. And Gary and Raven. Definitely voices of wisdom, boy. Thank you.
Well,
Someone's just
it'll take all of us to rectify this, worldwide. It'll take everybody coming together and realizing that community is not a neighborhood you live in. It's not a city you identify. Community is a matter of soul and heart, and it belongs to all of us, and all of us are a part of that community. Oh,
Thanks so much, Raven. Really nice seeing you. I hope to meet you in person.
hopefully someday soon.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I think we're getting closer. Yeah.